We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And I am distracted today. Plus, our Skype call quality is probably very, very low. In fact, I do believe Tom's camera just froze on my end, so he's not actually just staring down. Oh, he's moving again. But yeah, it's gonna be bad if you're watching the YouTube version. And that is because we got about a foot of snow overnight. We already had a snowfall earlier in my area. I am actually house sitting for my sister once again, so I really probably should not have ventured out this morning, showing a picture on YouTube or in the Flickr album if you want to follow along of the road conditions that I braved this morning to be here to record. So don't ever say I don't love you, folks. I went through... it took an hour for what normally takes about 25 minutes.
Somebody show Rob some love. He's so underappreciated around here.
In any case, it looks very pretty. It's less than optimal to drive across town in. But yeah, since that is out there, I don't know how well my internet connection and power stability is going to fare throughout this episode here. So, if there's technical glitches, please
Well,
be
we're
forewarned.
suffering here, too, in Florida. It got down to 49.
Whoa, that is pretty cold for you
yesterday.
guys. Yeah.
That is cold. I had to take my son to an orthodontist appointment, which was the excuse I used to not cycle.
Mm-hmm.
But the real reason is if I wore every piece of cycling clothes I owned,
Yeah.
I would still be too cold to go out there. And I'm not buying cold weather stuff because it doesn't make any sense.
Uh-huh.
So I have a couple of what people in Finland wear just normally, during the summer. I wear that during the winter here, and then if it gets too cold for that, I just stay home.
So what is that? That's 6 Celsius or so, somewhere in that range.
I guess, I don't know. It's not zero.
It's not zero. It's definitely
it's
above
above
32. I can do that much.
Yeah.
But all right. Well, we're both suffering through our weather then in our own ways. That's
I was still wearing shorts. I will
Yes.
say that yesterday. I wear shorts and a hoodie, but I was wearing shorts still, and I had socks on, which is also an important part of the winter attire. It's a serious winter when somebody's wearing flip flops and socks, shorts, and a big a hoodie or a big jacket, and a scarf.
Yeah,
That's
heat
when you
goes
know
up,
it's
man. You just got to protect the heat from going up. That's how it works.
Florida winter.
Absolutely.
What did you watch, Rob? We know what you watched. Tell
yes.
us about The Stupid Way of Water, which I'm sure was as about as good as you expected it to be, which was good, but also at the same time about as bad as I expect it to be. So let me see if I'm right. Go, Rob.
That's a pretty good guess. Yes, as I mentioned last week, I had already bought tickets to see Avatar: The Way of Water, the long-in-production sequel to Avatar, of course. I did see it in high frame rate, 48 frames per second. I did see it in 3D and in Atmos. So let me just say, just on the technical side, first of all, of course, this is the theater that I went to. What stood out most was the volume level was obviously too low. It was very clearly not at reference level. Very clearly. So that...
Dude, that is enough to make me... I've had that happen before.
Yeah.
And that is enough that just... I spent the whole movie so furious that I can't even enjoy the movie. So the fact that you sat there is... what is going on in there?
I don't know.
I can hear Alexa
turning around
just going off.
For the audio listeners, looking at things in his house. So that has nothing to do with my review of Avatar: The Way of Water. But yes, so one of the things we know is when you experience a movie at less than reference volume, some of the emotion is lost because a good portion of it is in the score and it's in the sound effects and things like that. So I don't want to talk about what I'm going to talk about, my reaction to the movie, without having mentioned that, because I do think it is significant. And then on the whole high frame rate thing, as I've said, every time I go to see it, I expect to dislike it. I have never hated it. I didn't hate it this time. I don't know if I noticed. I mean, I went in already knowing what he talked about, where sometimes they just showed the same frame twice in a row when they were doing less action-heavy scenes so that you wouldn't have that extra smooth type look for just the dramatic close-ups and things like that. And those did look exceedingly clear, really, really good without a strange-looking motion to it. I wanted to say, like, on the technical level of just having made this movie, like, it is very clearly exceedingly advanced CGI, probably the best looking CGI that we've seen to this point, to the point that I would almost say, like, is it maybe a little bit too good, in the sense that what I kept thinking was, this is like watching a spectacular athlete who does something that is really, really difficult to do, but they make it kind of look so easy that you don't like feel like it was difficult to do. You get what I mean?
Literally climbing, the sport of climbing. Like,
yes.
you watch somebody struggle at climbing, you're like, that looks really hard.
Right.
You watch somebody who does it really well, you're like, I could do that. They're not even trying. I mean, clearly I could do that. And I say that, and I have been climbing for 20 years.
Exactly.
And then I go up to the wall and touch it and go, what the hell were they holding on to? There's nothing here. How did they hold on to that? So,
like, I've watched enough of, like, the Corridor Crew guys on YouTube that I know they will be flipping their lids about this movie. And I've learned, I don't know very much about CGI and actual production of movies, but from the little bit I've learned from watching their videos and other videos on YouTube and that, I know they're going to be freaking out about, like, the close-ups and, like, the little moments where, the character has, like, just a reflection of, some moonlight that's kind of coming off the little iridescent part of their face, and, like, just all the textures and the way the light can kind of, like, glow through their skin and all that stuff. Like, I totally appreciate, every time I looked at it, I'm like, yeah, a lot of work clearly went into this. I can absolutely appreciate it on that level. But like I say, it's almost like it looks too easy now. Like, it looks too good now, to the point where I don't know if I reacted to it I didn't go, whoa. It was just kind of like, well, that was clearly a lot of work. That's my personal reaction to it on an emotional level.
You're right. I mean, if it looks natural, then it just looks natural.
Right.
And you don't appreciate it as, how many times have we said on this podcast, like, you can't appreciate the bass you're not hearing because you're not hearing it.
Indeed.
You can't appreciate how hard this is to do because it looks right. Yeah. You only notice it when it looks wrong.
And that's my very next point, which is, of course, now, in this version, so in the first Avatar, there were actually a fair number of scenes with humans. And there must have been CGI going on in the backgrounds and all that stuff, but we were, our focus was on human actors. There are exceedingly few humans in Avatar: The Way of Water. It is almost 100% CGI 100% of the time. And so because of that, one thought that kept coming into my mind is, and I think the high frame rate had quite a bit to do with this. I kept thinking, man, this looks like the absolute best, highest budget video game cutscene I've ever seen in my life. Because if you play video games and you look at today's cutscenes, which are, high production value, not as high production value as Avatar: The Way of Water, but when you watch them and they have that 60 frames per second movement and the motion capture movement, and to me, in motion capture, we still haven't, like, nailed down the movement of arms. They always look like a little bit too swingy and smooth. It doesn't quite look like a real arm movement. It's as though I think people are, like, pulling their punches when they're doing motion capture and stuff because they're wearing the suits, and I think it captures that maybe too accurately. So it has that slightly video game cutscene kind of look to it in a lot of the motion. And there were particular scenes when they were in the forest and running across the giant tree branches and stuff like that, where it's like, that really looks like a video game character running across a static background. Like, even though there's little movements and there's some 3D effects put in there, I'm like, it looks like someone walking across a green screen. Now, that was few and far between, and it stood out all the more because everything else looked so darn good. So it's exactly what Tom mentioned. Once you get to that level, it's like, the couple of times when it isn't perfect, then your brain goes, ah. So I had that happen to me. So I think that mostly covers everything I was thinking on the technical level. Not everything, but enough on the technical side of things. Story-wise, basically what I'll say from my take of this is, if you loved Avatar, and lots of people loved Avatar, clearly, and people went and saw it over and over again. So if that's you and you loved Avatar, I think you will love Avatar: The Way of Water. if you were someone who watched Avatar and kind of went meh at the story, you will go meh at the story of Avatar: The Way of Water, because there are many repeated story beats. So, I mean, one of the things is this is not a new story in any way. It is not bringing any fancy twist. It is his classic storytelling. And again, one of the things I kept thinking is I almost wish, like, I were a kid watching this as my first exposure to these story ideas, because, like, it's not that it's a bad story. It is a classic, long, often told story. And so because I've seen this story many times in the past, I'm like, okay, and nothing particularly new or interesting happens. It's not a bad story. It's just a classic story. That's all, much as Avatar was. So, like I say, if you saw Avatar and absolutely loved it, there's no reason you wouldn't love this movie on that level. But for me, because there was nothing surprising in the story whatsoever, and I am pretty darn sure where this story arc is going, maybe he'll turn it around and surprise me, but I have my doubts about that at this point. You know, again, emotionally, I just didn't react to it all that strongly, because I'm like, oh, okay, it's exactly where I expect every character arc in this to go. I don't think it's any spoiler to say, yes, we have new characters, and they meet some other new characters. That's pretty obvious from even the most cursory glance of the trailers or anything you would imagine the story. That they are learning the way of water. Yes, they're meeting new people. And it's like, oh yeah, you know, the new male character meets the new female character from the other tribe, and guess whose daughter she is, and guess how that father reacts to the newcomer. Like, you know, it's exactly what you would have just predicted. So I am unfortunately one of the, you know, slight, like, again, I don't want to say that I hated this movie at all. I absolutely didn't. It didn't bowl me over, and I kept thinking, like, it should. The money is clearly there on the screen. You know, the effort is there. I appreciate all of that. I just didn't get an emotional reaction to it, even though there is one thing that annoyed me with the characters, a little bit too much cat hissing and literal gnashing of teeth and wailing that turned me off. You know. Sorry, you're gonna say?
I've heard. I think the one review I watched of it, that was a spoiler-free review, that was basically like, you know, it's exact. You know, there's no surprises here, but James Cameron can tell a really good story, and he tells a really good story here, and you know, it's enjoyable, but it's nothing you haven't seen before, and you know exactly, if you've ever seen a movie before, you know what you're talking about.
If you've ever seen Avatar before, like you don't even have to have seen other movies and stories. If you've seen Avatar before, you know what's coming.
Yeah, it's not surprising. It reminds me of one time I was we used to before we moved to Australia, I was working from home, and my wife was working part-time from home and stuff. We hired like this young 18, 19-year-old girl to come in and watch my younger son, who wasn't in school, and so I could work. And I remember her saying like, "Oh, Lady Gaga, she's so innovative, and you know, she's a trendsetter." Right. I'm like, "Well, she is to you, but you know, to me." I look at her and go, it's kind of like Madonna. You know what I mean? It's a little like Madonna. And I'm sure there's somebody a generation older than me that looks at Madonna and says, oh, that's kind of like whoever the heck it was
performers in
that.
the 1920s and the 1930s who, you know, for their time, they absolutely could.
So what you're saying about, you know, wanting to see this movie, having experienced this kind of plot for the first time, I can understand what you're saying. Like, I can understand what you're saying. It's like my kids going back and watching Jaws. That's right. And going, I've seen this movie like 1,000 times. I'm because of this movie, you have seen this movie 1,000 times. You know, but they can't appreciate it for that exact reason. So I think your review is fair, and I hope it doesn't dissuade me from wanting to see it, because I'm like it's just like Avatar. I was like, it was a good movie. It was fine. Do I ever have to see it again? I don't. Yeah. I saw it the one time.
I don't
I'm good.
think you'd be angry watching it once. It's not like this isn't a movie anybody's going to walk out of or go, oh, I can't believe I paid money to see. Like, absolutely not. It's just, if you've seen Avatar, then you're not going to be super surprised. I do think that the 3 hour and 10 minute runtime is ridiculous. It did not need to be that long. The plot does not necessitate that. I could recite the entire plot to you in under 5 minutes. I'm quite confident of that. So it's not like the story, the plot required. He's indulgent on many of his scenes because he wants you to marvel at the beauty of what's going on underwater, and it is beautiful. But again, it's almost like it's too competent. So there are people who are raving about this movie, say they really got an emotional impact from it, are absolutely stunned by all the graphics, and I believe them, and I don't think there's any reason that they shouldn't feel that way. For me, it didn't land anything like that on any level, so for me, it's kind of a pretty middle, almost a little bit thumbs down ever so slightly, just because I'm already so used to this story, and I wish there was there was one little like C plot that is just set up for the next movie very clearly that I was a bit curious about with one of the characters, but unfortunately there's no payoff for that in this movie.
No payoff for that, right?
Yeah, so that's my take. I don't think there's any surprises, just like there aren't in the movie.
So the problem my God, Alexa is going crazy in the other room. She just keeps making noises. I think we're getting shipments because we waited way too late to buy Christmas presents this year. All right, so I wish that The Last Jedi hadn't been. There wasn't an internet.
Right?
For The Last Jedi to come out, because one of the I think the real selling points of the original trilogy of the Star Wars movie is how much the second movie like changed everything. Like the first movie was a classic story, right? This is the hero's journey. There was no real surprises there other than the technology and the lightsabers and stuff like that, but there was no real twists or turns or anything. And then the second, Empire absolutely turned everything instead. And people hated that movie. I mean, people walked out of that movie very angry and not understanding what was going on and being upset by it. But they had nobody to complain to. They may have written letters, but it's easy to ignore letters because you're the only one that sees them. And meaning the studio or whoever receives that stuff. But with The Last Jedi and the backlash and how the internet can amplify a handful, and I really do think it's more of a handful, and the people who are on that bandwagon are just like, well, I didn't really like it that much, and it's okay for me to say I hate it because all these other, a lot of people are saying I hate it. I think that if the story had the resolution it needed, which it did not get, then I think that The Last Jedi would have had that same sort of impact that Empire did. But now, because of that, it's at least to me, it's harder to take a first really good movie and then make a left turn with the second one. And I mean, you have to almost stay in that same lane. And then if you think of recording artists, right? Like recording artists take two real tracks. Like I'm talking about musicians and bands and stuff like that. You take two tracks. You either evolve as you get older and your tastes change and your musical influences change. You as an artist change and your music changes because of it. And in doing so, you go from people who got your first couple of albums and loved them and then going, oh yeah, but everything after the first couple of albums sucks.
Yep.
And then you get people who get you in the second towards that middle part, and they start liking that but don't like the early stuff and don't like the late stuff and that sort of thing. Or you're Linkin Park and you only made one song and you made it for like 17 albums. It's like the same thing. They haven't changed one iota from one album to the other, and that's where we are. And I would rather have the more Bob Dylan artist who is willing to evolve and change their sound completely and to challenge the audience rather than just seeing the same damn movie over and over and over again, which is where it seems like we're going. But we'll see. There's subversive artists out there. There's subversive movie makers out there who challenge their audience and aren't afraid to make movies that are a little bit different. But at the budget that James Cameron's doing it, he can do whatever he wants, and people are going to like it anyways. So why not take a chance? Why not try to say something different? Why not try to do something different? Why not?
I will absolutely say there are messages in The Way of Water. Subtlety, go on, get. You're not welcome here, subtlety. We don't do that around these parts.
I did hear that if you're not following the plot, you're dead. Because it's they recap for you. They're gonna let you know what's happening. So this one's gonna be good for my wife.
Aren't catching on to the environmental message he wants to say in this one? Oh boy, that's
by the title alone.
Really be actively trying.
James Cameron's trying to say something about the preserving the oceans. Where could that have come from? I don't know. Maybe like his entire life.
Right. Well, I talked way too long, but what did Tom watch this week?
Well, how was the 3D before we go on? Did you mention the 3D?
I didn't particularly mention it because, I mean, 3D looks really good these days. So it was subtle. It was subtle 3D.
Oh, good.
Yeah, there was nothing really coming in your face. There wasn't the foreground. It wasn't anything coming out of the screen at you. So it was all done to just enhance the realism. I don't think this is one that you must watch in 3D. Like, it does enhance the sense of I'm looking at real things on the screen, but because it was quite subtle and it was all depth into the screen, I think this is a movie that'll stand up really, really well in 2D. Yeah, that's my take on the 3D part of it.
So I did watch a movie this week. We got my wife and I got a recommendation to watch Burnt, which is a. I didn't mention that last week, did I?
I don't believe so. Not Burnt. No.
Yeah, we started it. I think we started it this week and finished it this week. I think we watched it in like 3 installments. It's got it was like a who's who of Marvel movies or like action movies. So it's got what's his name? Who I can't believe I cannot remember his name right now. Now he's the voice of Rocket Raccoon. He was in, of course, the Hangover movies.
Oh yeah. It flew out of my. I'm looking at his face in my mind.
Completely fallen out of my head. Bradley Cooper is in there. Mind. And then, and I've never known this actor's name, but he plays Baron Zemo. He's in there. He's one of the main. I can't remember his name. I love him too. He's
Brune.
Yeah, it's something. Yeah, he's in there. The girl who played Tomb Raider is a Tomb Raider.
The newest one?
Laura Croft, the newest one.
Alicia Vikander?
Plays like a bit role in there. Like Uma Thurman's in there. Emma Thompson's in there. It's like all these people kind of show up. And it's a movie about a chef who's like on a redemption arc and blah, blah, blah. It's fine. I mean, it was fine. It was, again, there's like no real shocks here in this movie either. If anything, he's like a recovering addict, and if anything, the shock, and I don't really think this is a spoiler, he doesn't really fall off the wagon. He does a little bit, but you never really see it.
Okay.
Like there's a suggestion that he might have gone out drinking one night, but they never show him drinking, never show him doing any drugs or anything else. He basically stays the straight and narrow as best he can, but there is a growth arc for him, which was kind of nice. It's always kind of the easy, he's got to have this relapse so that he can become a better person thing. I thought it was fine. It was certainly watch. It's not a new movie. It's an older movie.
Okay.
And staying in the theme of restaurant movies, we just about finished The Bear or whatever it's called. Yeah.
I'm guessing that's on Hulu for you guys?
It is on Hulu for us.
Yeah, it's Disney Plus up here.
Yeah, that's a lot of cursing for Disney Plus. It's actually a lot of cursing for FX, which is what it's on. But I don't know if they're bleeping it or what. But it was fine. We did not finish the last episode yet. We're going to. We're kind of in the middle of it right now. And you can see where it's going. So I feel okay. The second to last episode, I spent like 2/3 of the episode just kind of like watching it, and then I realized this is one continuous take. The entire, it's like a half an hour episode that's one continuous take.
Yeah.
Which everybody seems to have to want to do at least part of that these days. But it was quite well done. It was so seamless and well done that I was pretty surprised. I may be wrong about the one take thing, but it certainly seemed that way by the time I started noticing it. There definitely weren't any more takes.
It's a popular thing. The Baron Zemo actor is Daniel Bruhl, by the way. I was getting pretty close.
Anyways, Sienna or Sierra Miller is also in that movie.
Sienna,
Burnt. Sienna Miller. So there's great actors, great performances. I find Bradley Cooper to be distracting to watch in anything other than a comedy. I don't know what it is about that guy, but he just like he plays kind of like if he's not smiling and like being goofy, I have a harder time taking him seriously. But I think it's just because of his face. It's not because of him as a person or whatever. That's just because of his face.
He was pretty good in A Star Is
Both
Born.
things are both things are
update to A Star Is Born. He's pretty good in that.
Yeah, whatever. I didn't see that. I usually don't watch coming of age anything, but I got sucked into this thing. So both those things are worth watching. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I will say that Burnt felt more from my experience of being in kitchens, and you'll see a lot of throwing of plates. And chefs throwing things on the floor and getting mad about food being too late or too early or too cold or too warm or whatever. That may feel unreal to somebody who's never been in like a high-end kitchen, but I have been in a high-end kitchen, and I've watched chefs just slide the entire row into the garbage can and say, start again.
Yeah.
And they're like, but we need that food. Nope, it's not good enough. It's
too
not
late
going
now.
out. And yeah. So that feels more real to me than the Bear, whatever it's called, which is just everybody is so abusive to each other in that movie that I'm like, this is not. This is
a little
not
too far.
It's a little bit too far.
It might have been somebody's real life experience, though. It's not out of the question that one kitchen somewhere was like that.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that that's not true. Yeah. I'm sure there are kitchens like that. But for me, it was like not as much fun to watch. But and then again, I didn't like Breaking Bad for the same reason. I just felt like, like I don't need to see this much. Anyways, my 16-year-old son is now watching it without my permission, but whatever. AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Come to our website where you can find our episodes, our show notes, and our Flickr albums where you can follow along with the pictures that we talk about on this podcast. You can find us at, let me see, facebook.com/AVRant podcast, youtube.com/AVRant, where you can see our faces. And apparently I might be, there's a chance either I am feeling real buff today or I accidentally put on my son's shirt. Because we have both of the same shirt and we both
can't see too much of you, really just your shoulders, so it doesn't come across.
Well, if I'm looking swole.
Yeah.
It's not because I went to the gym. If you want to contact us directly, it's rob@avrant.com. I don't even think Twitter is going to last the week at this point. It feels very much like it's...
Who knows? Hive does seem to be back up, so I'll still say I'm at First Reflect on Hive. Come find me there.
There you go.
That'll work.
Tom@avrant.com, and don't try to find me anyplace else because I'm not going to answer. I did get a movie code.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot to put that in the thing. That I forget who that was from. Do you remember?
We'll have to look it up. We'll have to look it up. Okay. If you want to support this podcast, you can do that by going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, which will send you to a PayPal donation site, or you can go to patreon.com/avrantpodcast, where you can become one of our monthly subscribers. 135 patrons right now, and each month Patreon takes a little bit of money from them and gets most of it to us. So we have 135, including Martin. So thank you to our 135 patrons.
Yes, indeed. That is patreon.com/AVRantPodcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. And thank you very much to the 135 people who have done just that. Martin, thank you very much for being one of them. It's nice to see that number that popped back up.
That's right.
There's the name.
I'm trying to look up. Oh, I was just looking at it. Yeah. Okay. If you can't support us financially, we understand. Do something to support us, and we will mention here. So, first of all, I got a Movies Anywhere code from Dan for Alita Battle Angel, which I'm excited about. So, thank you very much, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for sending in that Movies Anywhere code for Tom.
We also got, I also got some photos to use on avgadgets.com, where I'm editor-in-chief, with permission to use them indefinitely for the rest of eternity, from Michael and Dylan. I think I spelled Dylan properly here. I didn't really pay attention to how you spelled it.
That's very nice. Yeah, we appreciate that. Tom is editor-in-chief over at avgadgets.com. And if you're willing to send in photos that you're okay with him posting on avgadgets.com, and they might be up there forever and ever and ever until the end of the internet. So giving that permission is much appreciated. Michael and Dylan, thank you for doing that.
Okay. Sorry, I was clicking off at Twitter. We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through whatever's burning down this week from Lance. Dan, he says, all of Tom's one-liners generally off the cuff. They're hilarious. Way to go, man. And the answer is I do literally zero preparation for this podcast.
It is certainly not scripted.
Yeah, there is nothing scripted in this podcast at all. Maybe, the stuff I read. The stuff I read
the
in
questions
the news,
that are being read, yes,
like
clearly,
that.
yes.
Yeah, you can tell when I'm reading and when I'm not. Believe me.
Most likely, yes.
Yeah. Yes, everything is. This is me on this podcast. Well, I think it's pretty much Rob too. I think Rob might be. Yeah, I think it's you for the most part. I don't feel like
if I don't have any contribution to this podcast. Yeah, no. I guess I'm a little heightened version of myself on here slightly, but no, the folks who have met me in person and had our little dinner chats and that, I don't think there's any surprises going on with who we are on the podcast versus who we are in real life.
That's right. So we also got a note from Peter, who's from Sweden, Jay, Michael, and Martin, who's from Ireland, and says Happy Christmas. And Happy Christmas to you as well, Martin. So thank you very much.
Yeah, so I'll say the names one more time. Lance, Dan, Peter, Jay, Michael, and Martin. Thank you all very much for sending in the notes of gratitude. The notes of encouragement are very much appreciated. A big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. And yes, this will be our Christmas episode and our Boxing Day episode too. All of those things are happening, the week of this podcast episode coming out. So happy holidays, everybody, and hope everybody has an enjoyable time.
Got some news here from Infinite Gary. This comes from him. Parasound is under new ownership. Parasound's founder, Richard Schramm.
I think.
Schramm.
I think it would be
That's
Schramm.
A lot of vowels in a row. Schramm has decided to retire and sold the company to David Sheriff, an entrepreneur who brings 30 years of manufacturing and distribution experience and recently sold his consulting company in 2021. Many of his clients were in audio or audio-related industries. Richard Schramm stated that he delayed his retirement because he didn't want Parasound to be subsumed by a large corporation. He talked through the decision with John Curl, the well-known circuit and amplifier designer whose work remains the underpinning of Parasound's products, and are happy to have found David Sheriff with the hopes that he'll be able to continue to grow the business and not flip it.
It really does not sound like it. It sounds like he is genuinely interested in seeing this company forward. He wants to bring his expertise in the distribution and manufacturing side of things, which is something that he feels his experience with multiple companies over 30 years that he can find better efficiencies and things like that on that side of the business. So there you go. He does seem genuinely interested. This doesn't seem like a flip, and it doesn't seem like just some giant shell corporation out there gobbling up companies. Far from it. It's quite the opposite. So
Sound United.
Yeah, they didn't want to sell to Sound United. They didn't want to sell
the man
to
does the dad
Vox.
joke the give me dad joke when he buys a company. He does, there's a new sheriff in town. You think he does that? That he wears a shirt, like a polo shirt.
If he wasn't, he is now. It's out there.
He's probably like, oh my God, I can't believe I haven't been doing that. Yes,
that's right.
That's the level of humor I bring to this. That's the off the cuff that you pay big money for.
Couldn't help himself. Couldn't edit himself. Had to come out of his mouth.
Jesus. I got some monoprice HDMI cables, by the way.
Huh.
I'll talk about those more later.
Okay.
A little bit of pre-CES 2023 news has started to trickle out. Samsung Display is readying their second generation QD-OLED panels, and they've confirmed there will be a new 77-inch size in addition to the current 55 and 65. They've also indicated via a new True Black trademark that they've improved the black levels in the presence of ambient light. This year's models had the screen turning to a dark gray in well-lit rooms compared to the inky black retained by LG's OLED panels. So hopefully next year models are set to improve on that. Well, yeah.
It was like the one criticism of the quantum dot OLED panels that Samsung and Sony brought out this year, but all of them were manufactured by Samsung Display and then sold by Samsung Electronics and Sony Electronics. So yeah, the new screen size. I'm excited about the 77-inch screen size. I'm thinking I might end up getting a Sony QD-OLED at a 77-inch size. That's very, very tempting. So we'll see, and I'll be happy, even happier, if those blacks remain inky black, just like LG Display's OLEDs do.
So a new American TV company called Displace, so display, but Displace, is looking to make a splash at CES 2023 when they'll debut what they're calling the world's first truly wireless TV. It's a 55-inch OLED that uses swappable batteries and has no ports or wires whatsoever on the panel itself. Naturally, there's a wireless companion box that does need to be plugged in. It houses all the ports for connecting sources, but also has an AMD CPU, CPU, and an NVIDIA GPU in it, as well as Wi-Fi 6E, which seems to be the wireless signal being used to communicate with a truly wireless TV panel. All of that processing and graphics power is likely to be used for real-time data compression, but Displace is also saying you'll be able to stitch together multiple 55-inch panels to create, say, like a 110-inch 8K display. Mm-hmm. This isn't a modular display, though. There will still be a small gap between those stitched-together panels for the super thin frames for each display. Folks at CES will get to see exactly how big those gaps are. Displace claims the battery will run for a full month, as long as you only watch 5 minutes a day.
No.
For a full month based on using the TV for 6 hours a day. No price or release date have been announced. So vaporware until that happens.
It is a bit, but it's interesting development. I just thought it worth mentioning. We'll see how it goes.
Who is this for? Who is this for, Rob? Who is this for?
Sure. I think it's for interior designers.
Use case application of this.
Yeah.
Because let's put it this way. What do you think the chances are the batteries are easily accessible when the thing is on a mount on a wall?
Well, it looks like there's a slot on the side from the one little promo image that they've thrown out there. It looks like there's a fairly accessible slot on the upper right-hand side that kind of looks like maybe it's the type you kind of push in and it would pop back out. And that seems to be the way they're saying it's a swappable battery. So, yeah, I think this is for interior designers. That's about it. They want to be able to have their photograph in their magazine and then be like, no, it really is that wireless. You don't have to run a cable inside the wall or behind it or anything.
I'm just trying to figure out, like, who's going to use this. Like, what? Like, at first I thought, okay, this is good for, like, outdoor TVs. Like, putting a TV on a porch or something like that. But not really. I mean, how does it really help you that much? And will it be able to transmit through walls? Because that's what it would need. I just don't know.
They just want to be able to say, it's truly wireless TV. You hang it on your wall, no other prep.
I wonder if the idea here is that they are going to debut this technology and then try to market it to Samsung and LG and Sony and all those guys so that they can use it
for the modular displays.
Yeah. Can you imagine trying to swap out the batteries from them? Well, the modular display too. I mean, you'd have to worry about what side the battery was on, right? You still would have to be able to get to it. I don't know. Anyways, some comments from our listeners. Peter wanted to share a link to the Entertainment Industry Professionals Mentoring Alliance YouTube page where they posted a 5-part webinar covering Atmos production and post-production. Peter found it enlightening to hear creative professionals giving insights into how Atmos mixes are created and the many facets taken into account when creating Atmos soundtracks. How long is it, is the question, because that sounds like it takes a long time.
I didn't total it all up, but it's a 5-part webinar series, and we'll have the link to the Entertainment Industry Professionals Mentoring Alliance.
8, 10, about 11 hours.
Okay. Well, that's a full course, so that's good value. It's on YouTube. You don't have to pay anything for it, so we'll have the link for that, the EIPMA.
I might have to watch that. Michael, several months ago, Michael asked us about subwoofer options for his 29 by 19 by 13-foot room. He didn't like what we said. He got mad, and now he's rage quit us. Sorry.
Not quite. He's written back.
Oh, sorry, Michael. Didn't mean to besmirch your good name. Since he was able to get some SVS PC13 Ultra cylinder subs at a discount, we said they'd be a very good choice, and there's also the option to upgrade their amplifiers to the current PC4000 amp that adds the SVS smartphone app, so he went for it. Michael recalls that Rob did the PC13 Ultra to PC4000 amp upgrade and wound up installing the new amps upside down so they would physically fit properly. That was very helpful, he says. But he decided to contact SVS to get their official advice, and they provided lots of help along the way in fashioning a spacer out of 1/2 inch Baltic birch. My lazy butt would totally flip that thing upside down and just call it a day. There is no world in when I think that solid state amp cares what orientation it is in, so I would flip it upside down. But good for you, Michael. Michael is quite handy, so this was not a complicated project for him. Precise measurements were taken, and he then cut the necessary frame from a piece of Baltic birch, which was the specific wood that SVS recommended. See, you lost me at precise measurements taken.
Yes.
That's where I would have failed. I am very much a measure 17 times and still get it wrong kind of guy. He only needed a jigsaw as far as power tools go, and it created the perfect spacer to allow the necessary clearance between the new amplifier and the flared ports inside the PC13 Ultra cylinder. He painted the outside of the spacer black and used screws that are 1/2 inch longer than the original screws, and it works perfectly. So we've got some pictures here, I think. I don't know what this white thing is. It white the birch? Is that what it is? No.
Yep, that was the Baltic birch just as a solid piece when it was starting out.
Okay. And then he cut it out. I get it. Yeah. I think it's got tape measure there, which, yeah.
So it does
and
look
you get to
very
see the port
nice.
that's inside there. So there you go.
That's right.
Yeah.
I have no doubts that this is working excellently and flawlessly. This is like the official method of replacing the PC13 Ultra's amp. This is SVS's own advice. I'm still quite happy with my solution of turning it upside down and using the screws that are already there and doing no additional work besides the slightly odd look of the letters being upside down and the power plug being at the top in the way that I did it.
I'm a little confused as to why the SVS doesn't just send along with the amp,
send a frame,
a spacer. Right. Yeah, that's a little weird that they're going to require you to do that. I mean, I'm not. Whatever. It's it's fine. Whatever. Yeah. I think that they should send a spacer along. I
appreciate the effort that went into that.
I do too. Good job, Michael. From let's get to some questions here. We got Steven. Steven has his home theater, and then he also has a dedicated 2-channel setup using just a pair of tower speakers. They have a -3 dB point at 40 hertz, and he had been using them full range this whole time. As an experiment, he brought a single subwoofer to his 2-channel setup. It doesn't have any bass management or dedicated subwoofer output, but his sub has speaker wire high-level input, so he connected it with the speaker wire and then adjusted the subwoofer's crossover knob by ear until he thought he had a good blend. To get someone else's take on it, he brought in his wife. Oh my God, don't ever talk about it. It's like the biggest no-no.
Hey, even you've said, maybe. Even my wife noticed at one point, so.
I know, that's
you can't help it.
No. So his wife, who has zero interest in all of this, but he played her some songs, and sometimes with the sub on, and sometimes with the sub off. He never told her whether it was on or off. He just asked her whether she liked the one playthrough better or the other, and every single time she picked the playthrough with the sub on. This 2-channel setup, it gets used only for music. So what are our thoughts on adding a subwoofer? Is this literally the first time you've ever heard this podcast? Do we have any recommendations for a specific subwoofer model? He's read that smaller subwoofer drivers are faster and better suited to music. So maybe, and I'm not even going to read the rest of that nonsense. Right. Okay, so we have consistently and universally recommended that you always add a subwoofer no matter what.
Every system, every room, whatever the use case, we approach audio overall in a bottom-up approach. We want to lay the foundation of accurate, linear, uniform bass throughout the entire listening space, or at least the core listening area that you care about. We want to achieve that and have that as our platform, as our base, as our foundation, and then be able to build the imaging and sound stage of the directional sounds, the mid-range and treble, on top of that already well-established base foundation. So that's our philosophy of how we approach audio in any situation, in any room, for any use case. Video games, movies, music, TV, doesn't matter. It's all sound. There's no, this is good for one type of sound, but not another type of sound, in our opinion. So we will absolutely always recommend not even just a subwoofer. We will pretty much always recommend at least 2 subwoofers, sometimes 4 subwoofers, but two is where you get a big benefit over 1 subwoofer. And then going from 2 to 4, there is benefit to be had, absolutely, but it is not the same amount of benefit as going from 1 to 2. So if you want that uniform bass across 2, 3, 4 seats, and you want that nice, even uniformity, full pressurization of the room as we should be able to achieve down into the truly sub-bass frequencies, then we're going to be looking at getting dual subwoofers. And that's pretty much always going to be our approach. So, I mean, I can see where he's coming from, right? There's so much of the 2-channel music-only advice from multiple reputable, well-known, well-respected sources other
Only
than
listen
us.
in pure direct mode. That's
that.
the advice. That's the advice. Pure direct. That's the way the music was intended to be listened to. Oh, really? Is that
got
true?
the word pure in it, doesn't it? Yeah.
Is that true? Because did the room it was recorded in, was it exactly the same size, shape, and acoustically treated exactly the same as the room I'm currently in? Was the room that the music mastered in exactly the same size, shape, and acoustically treated, and the person was sitting in the same location that I am currently sitting in? Is that how the music was meant to be listened to? Are you sure?
Right.
Because there's a lot of variables here that you're not taking into account. But, hey, whatever. Don't worry. Reddit's going to tell me I'm wrong anyway, so they can suck it.
But the big challenge, of course, is mostly in our minds, which is getting away from the idea of if I just have 2 channels, just front left and front right, and one of those channels is saying play the bass out of this channel. That's what the signal is. The set of instructions in the signal is saying play the bass out of this channel. It is intuitive to think, well, then I want ideally that bass to be coming from the front left speaker if the bass is encoded in the front left channel of the recording. Intuitively, that absolutely makes sense. And it's true for the mid-range and the treble. That's where we need it to come from. We're able to detect directionally just through triangulation of our 2 ears being on either side of our head, whether the sound was coming left or right or center or to some extent behind us and above us. All of that, our triangulation capabilities let us do that. But when it comes to deep bass below the transition frequency of the room, where we are never hearing direct sound, we are only ever hearing reflected sound. The wavelengths of the bass frequencies are so long that they have traveled past our ear, bounced off a wall, and come back to our ear again before we've ever been able to detect them. We don't need that it emanated from this location in the room. We're not able to suss that out through triangulation between our ears or other spatial cues. Therefore, we just need to lay that very uniform bass foundation, and that is best achieved through a pair of subwoofers or possibly quad subwoofers. So that's absolutely our philosophy on that. Are we going to be able to convince you if you're just fully on into the 2-channel audiophile camp who just says, nope, ideally, you wouldn't have subwoofers. Ideally, it'd be full range speakers.
Literally did the test that proved it wrong.
Yes,
but
that's right.
Keep believing because that's how science works, I guess.
But if my repeating what I've just said there about our philosophy of how to do this can sway you and maybe just make you feel better about what you experienced for yourself, but you have doubts because of all the other advice that's out there, and I completely understand that. But if we can put your mind at ease, we think you are absolutely in the right camp to do things the way that you did. Now, as to specific subwoofers, this whole thing of our smaller drivers faster and therefore better for music, our sealed subwoofers faster and tighter and therefore better for music, but maybe they don't have quite enough punch and authority way down deep for movies. There is the scenario where you take a given driver, you take a given amplifier, you put one of them in a small sealed box, you put the other in a large ported box, and there are detectable, audible, and measurable differences. You've kept everything the same, made no other design choices, and just changed the size and porting orientation of the cabinet. Or, yes, you take a, large, gigantic magnet floppy driver and attach it to too weak an amplifier and it gets out of control, or too powerful an amplifier and it gets out of control, versus a woofer that doesn't need nearly as much power and you keep it within its linear range. Sure, things like this can go on, and unfortunately those types of overgeneralizations creep into this, well, that just means all large subwoofer drivers are bad and all ported subwoofers are bad for music. And that is completely untrue. It's all down to a matter of, is this a well-designed and built and executed subwoofer or not? Because when we measure these deep bass frequencies, we can absolutely see examples of quite large subwoofer drivers, 15, 16-inch subwoofer drivers, in ported cabinets that still have exceedingly fast transient response, exceedingly low distortion, and very, very low group delay. That isn't universal. It's not like every large subwoofer in a big ported box performs that well and retains great transient response and great group delay. Like, you can have bad subwoofers. It's pretty easy to make one. But you can have really good subwoofers.
There's entire DIY groups dedicated to the prospect of making bad subwoofers. You can find them. They're not that hard to find.
All of this is to say, you absolutely do not need to think, I can only get a small subwoofer, I can only get a sealed subwoofer. Do not do that. What you want to get is the correct subwoofer for your room size. It has nothing to do with what speakers you're using. It has nothing to do with what content you're listening to. It has everything to do with the size of your room. And we don't have that information from you right now. Yep. If you're in your living room and it's a great room and it's open to your dining room and kitchen, you're going to need a very large, high output capable subwoofer just to contend with the volume of air, the cubic footage of air that you are attempting to move and pressurize in that wide open space. On the other hand, if this 2-channel setup is in a small enclosed spare bedroom, SB1000 Pros might be all you need, absolutely. So it's entirely dependent on the room that you're in and really not the associated equipment or the speakers or what you're listening to or anything like that.
All right, so Rob talked a whole bunch, and I'm not going to. So, but what I will say is this. I've spent a lot of time over on AV Gadgets talking about and writing about all of these issues that you are basically debunking, if you will. Not really debunking, but just showing the science behind why these thought processes, which have a lot of what we used to call face validity, which we don't talk about anymore, but it's just the idea. It makes sense. A smaller driver would be faster because it's smaller and lighter, and I can move things faster if it's smaller and lighter than something that's heavier and bigger. So, it makes sense that a large driver would be slower. It might make sense, except of science, and how things work. A bus is bigger and heavier and harder to move, but it can absolutely, with the right modifications and built correctly, smoke another vehicle that is built to a different specification, even though it might be smaller and lighter. So it's all about design. So I've got a bunch of articles listed here that are going to talk about all of the things that you've addressed.
They'll all be linked in the show notes on YouTube. It'll be in the description down below. On our website, it'll be in the show notes. So links to all sorts of things over at avgadgets.com.
But the thing to remember here is that music, and you can make the argument that you don't need a subwoofer for music because the music that you listen to doesn't play notes low enough to justify it. You can make that argument. I don't think it's correct. I think that you don't really know how low your music goes. You just think it doesn't go that low. And like we talked about at the very beginning of this podcast about not knowing what you're not hearing because you're not hearing it, this is a perfect example of it. So, getting your subwoofers, knowing, not worrying about whether or not they're ported or small or big or whatever, getting the right one for your room or the right two for your room is the most important part. Placing them properly is part of that, and then letting your speakers handle the energy, the sounds that have a directionality to them, and letting the subwoofers do all the bass. That will give you the best response. You need, for music, for movies, for games, there are no good speakers for one that are not as good for another. Either they are good or they are not good. The idea that a speaker can somehow be good for music and at the same time not be good for movies, or, which is more often the case with the audiophiles because they're a bunch of elitist buttheads, that they think that their music speakers can be good for both, but movie speakers are only good for movies. What they're really saying is, these are speakers that I think are good, therefore they're good for everything, and these are speakers I think are bad, which means let the peons that watch movies with speakers use them. That's all they're really saying. They're just elitist, exclusionary buttheads and let them sit in their little castle talking to each other about what needle to use on their stupid turntable, while the rest of us buy really good quality everything, actually treat our rooms with room treatments instead of little clocks and the wishes of their children, and have good sound while they're sitting there swapping out their power cords and their speaker cables.
Now,
so,
when we say these things, good sound, what we want, linearity, accuracy, all of these types of words, all of that is coming, and this is leading right into our next question, so this is a little bit of a preamble, but all of that is based on what Tom and I both want, which is we look at, here is a signal. It's coming from our movie, it's coming from our music, it's coming from whatever sound source. There is a signal, and we just think of that as a set of instructions, because that's what it is. It's saying, make this sound, this note, for this long, at this volume. That's what the signal is. And we believe that it makes sense for that signal to reach our ears. And to be able to say what reached my ears is very, very close to the instructions that were given to my sound reproducing equipment. That sound reproducing equipment was given this signal, this set of instructions that said, do this. And we think, is that what reached my ears? Or did something else reach my ears? And if what reached my ears is what the signal said to do, we evaluate that as good and accurate.
That's right.
And that has not necessarily anything to do with preference or taste, and that's coming right into Dan's question now.
Yes, absolutely. Excuse me. I need some more coffee, I'm going to be honest with you.
Tom drank too much. He's burping away here.
I am burping away, but I like yesterday, I was writing so much and so quickly that I forgot to drink coffee, and I spent all day yesterday with a headache and couldn't figure out why, and now I'm making up for it today.
Withdrawal.
That's right. Dan, carrying right along with a similar topic, Dan has a couple of pairs of older tower speakers, Paradigm Studio 100s, and Klipsch Synergy F30s. Sounds like a truck. He just wanted to hook them up briefly to make sure they still worked, and he did in his 21 by 15 foot long room, sitting about 12 feet away with the speakers about 9 feet apart. In his normal setup, he always sets the speakers to small, and he uses dual subwoofers. He was expecting the bass from just a pair of speakers, either Paradigms or Klipsch's, to sound way worse, as he just ran them full range with no EQ or anything, but to his surprise, playing stuff from Apple Music, there was a wonderful amount of pleasing bass. And while the Paradigm sounded better than the Klipsch's in every single way, the Klipsch Tower still sounded pretty nice, playing loud and clear. So he's aware of how important the room is in all of this, and how a specific layout in a specific room will have a tremendous effect on the bass response. But did he just get lucky? Or should he give more consideration to the idea of running Tower's speakers full range, basically in pure mode?
No EQ. That's what we're driving at there. No EQ applied. No bass management.
When it comes to music listening, should you just run it in full range pure mode?
Now, see, again, I understand.
I cannot
it's
stress.
He's been reading all this.
I'm going first. I'm going first. I'm going first this time.
Yeah.
Because I want to go get coffee, and then you can.
Okay.
So I cannot stress enough how people do not know what bass is. People do not know what bass is. People think any note that is like James Earl Jones or lower is bass. And even things that are higher than James Earl Jones, that's kind of bass too. It really isn't the bass that your subwoofer gets. The bass your subwoofer gets is exceedingly low. It is like really, really low.
100 hertz is much lower than you think it is.
Yeah. And so they're like, oh, I can't believe this. Like you expect, and many people do, and it's because we never really test it. You expect that when you take the subwoofers out of your system, suddenly you're going to have nothing but treble. That's not how that works. There is plenty. Your itty bitty satellite speakers still produce a decent amount of bass, of what you would call bass. Maybe not very as loud as these tower speakers that you're now referring to, but they would still play notes that you would go, well, that sounds like bass to me. It is bass, but it's not subwoofer bass. It is not.
I mean, everything below 500 hertz is bass.
And your subwoofer doesn't kick in until like, I mean, if you cross over at 80, it kicks in with like 95, 100 or something like that. It's when it really starts making any sort of rumble, and then at 80, it's in there at something resembling authoritative bass or output. Yes, I believe you that those speakers played bass. What I don't believe is that you really have any idea, and I'm not saying this as because I don't think you're smart or whatever. I just don't think that any of us, and understandably, any of us actually turn off our subwoofers and go, "Let me hear what my speakers are actually doing," and understand how low they can actually play just by themselves. The thing is the reason that we want the subwoofers to play the really low stuff is because of the room interactions and how it bounces around the room, and making sure the subwoofers are in the right place to get the most even bass. That does not mean that your speakers don't play some bass. So, you should, okay, like, it sounded pretty good to me. That's a preference, okay? And
Sure.
if you want to run it full, pure direct, full range, I don't give a crap. Do what you want with your life. That's fine. I would rather, in my room, know that whatever I'm listening to has been EQ'd so that what is hitting my seat is what was meant to hit my seat and not something I just prefer. So that if I do prefer to make adjustments to it, I know I'm adjusting on a baseline that is accurate. Okay, not, hey, this song sounds pretty good in these full range speakers, and then the next song doesn't because whatever's going wrong with the room, whatever the inaccuracies are suddenly not as pleasing to you because of the song has different emphasis in different parts of the frequency range. I'm getting more coffee.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is a matter of, let's assume that it was a case where it was something quite low, down in 120 hertz, 100 hertz, or something like that, and you were saying, well, I would think that transitioning to just full range tower speakers and not having subwoofers active, that I would notice a detriment to not having these, subwoofers available to play those deep bass notes. But it's running into exactly the situation that we're always talking about, which is, the speaker up front, the tower speaker up front, it can generate the sound that the signal called for. That has never been the issue. When we're talking 20 hertz, very often it's the issue where your full range tower speaker literally just cannot generate what the signal is asking for. But if we're talking 80 hertz, 60 hertz, there are plenty of speakers that can generate from wherever they are in the room the sound that the signal called for. But once the speaker generates that frequency, it emanates out into the room, and now the room takes over. And this is what we're talking about when we're saying just using bass-heavy music or a bass-heavy movie to try and evaluate whether or not you have optimized the setup of your bass is not a good approach, because you don't actually know whether what you're hearing, as pleasing or displeasing as it subjectively might be, is what the signal actually requested. That's where you do kind of need to fall back on, if not measurements so that you can look at it on a graph, at least just playing a bass sweep and listening to that with your ears, and probably in more than one seat. Because what you'll almost certainly discover playing your tower speakers full range, if you play a bass sweep, you will end up hearing that the volume of that bass sweep goes up and down. And the signal did not say to do that. The signal of the bass sweep said to play all of those sounds in that sweep at exactly the same volume. And that's the part that's going to have changed, and that's the part that isn't going to sound the same. Now, is there a possibility of taking a full range tower speaker, setting it up in your room, you sitting in one specific seat, and actually having pretty darn linear accurate bass from that given speaker? It can happen. It is absolutely possible to get lucky. And particularly, like, he set up his room wider than it is long, so could his speaker be 1/4 of the way from the side wall? It's probable. It's very plausible that that is what happened, and mathematically that gives you the best chance that what you're going to end up hearing at your seat, at least down to the 60 hertz range, that type of thing, is going to be pretty linear and accurate. So it's not out of the question that if you played a sweep and you sat in that one seat, that it actually is pretty darn good. That's entirely possible. Maybe you did just get lucky. Or maybe you sit one seat over and that's no longer the case, whereas it would be if you still had your dual subs.
6 inches. maybe you recline your chair.
Maybe it's just that, oh, hey, that given song that I put on, it thumps extra now. That's not what the signal actually requested, but it thumps extra now because now that speaker is generating the sound instead of properly placed and set up subwoofers, we're getting a big hump at that given frequency. And hey, it's pleasing. I like it. There's extra thump that wasn't there before, but it's not actually what the signal said to do. But that is, if you just like it and you go, you know what, I like it better, you're allowed to have that hump. That's what happens all the time. It's just when we're saying what's good, what's accurate, we fall back on basically playing. I mean, we don't measure with microphones and look at graphs as much as some other people do. We talk about it, but we don't actually do it ourselves, Tom and I. But we kind of rely on our ears, and I play more sweeps than Tom does, but Tom has played sweeps now and then just to go, yep, that sounds pretty even and reasonable, and then we're happy.
Yeah. All right. Regarding RCA audio interconnects, cables, whatever. Mm-hmm. He's pretty sure we mentioned just to use coax cables with RCA plugs, not twisted pair cables. He doesn't see any reason to use anything other than the coax design. But there are audio folks. First of all, you got to change the forums you're hanging out on, number one. Okay?
It's tough, you know? I mean, I get it because it seems so convincing. There's multiple people saying this stuff. They seem to have pseudo-scientific, somewhat technical sounding reasons for why.
And you're like, wow, it seems like there's a lot of people saying this. Yeah, it's the same people. It's just the same people. Anyways, they say they use 75 ohm coax for analog video, but twisted pair provides lower impedance, around 45 ohms, and that's better for analog audio. So how do we know that the 75 ohm coax is actually the right type of cable for analog audio signals? Can we point to some technical explanation or reasoning that would explain our recommendation versus the audio files? Well, first of all, you lost us at audio files. Let's just go with that, because I'm pretty sure that they don't know what the heck they're talking about. And I can see what Rob is about to recommend here. And I literally, yesterday, wrote an article about in-wall cables. And the reference I used to inform my article was some of these same, not this exact, these the same articles, but articles from the same website. This is the go-to. You have a question about cables and don't understand something about cables, this is where you go, because these people know more about cables than I will ever know. So go ahead, Rob.
And that is Blue Jeans Cable. I mean, they are a retailer, so some people are going to question the motivation behind this, but if you're willing to take my word for it, the technical articles that they have posted about cable and cable design and everything to do with impedance, resistance, capacitance, inductance, shielding, balanced signals versus unbalanced signals, common mode rejection, all of that stuff. The technical articles that they have written out, which is not, like, it is in layman's terms. It gets a bit techie and a bit heavy in places, and certainly Kurt Danke is not someone who spares words when he writes out what he's doing, but kind of beyond reproach, the information that's in here, really interesting stuff. And actually, I've got 5 ones that I think pertain exactly to this subject. I'm not going to repeat all the information here, as verbose as I can be. It's too much, but I'll have the articles for you to read for yourself. But getting into the exact science behind that impedance rating in the cable and what does actually matter in terms of the audio signal versus the video signal. Audio signals have a very low impedance load. When we're talking electrically, we're, a speaker that's 8 ohms, something like that, very low impedance load. And what's coming out of the amplified section is a much, much higher impedance. That means that you don't have an impedance matched system like you do in video, where from end to end, you need to have the same impedance, including across the cable, so that you don't get reflections of signals inside of the cable that end up degrading the signal. In an audio chain, you don't have that. So it almost doesn't matter what the impedance of the cable is in an audio section. Where you end up saying you want a 75 ohm video cable for audio purposes is simply because it will have proper shielding. He gets into, in the balanced versus unbalanced article that I'll have linked to, the whole genesis of where this twisted pair for audio idea came from, and it was, not surprisingly, a complete misunderstanding, which was that back in the day, most audio cables in all professional settings were balanced. They were balanced cables. They do not have shielding. They have common mode rejection. You have 2 leads in a twisted pair that go down the cable. They both pick up noise along the way, but one of them gets inverted on the other end, and so it cancels that noise out. Well, it just became shorthand to say, well, that's the type of cable you want for audio. not realizing that it wasn't because it's twisted pair. It was because it was balanced and had common mode rejection. You get to an unbalanced single-ended signal, you don't want twisted pair anymore. You want a cable that has shielding, and the cables that we can rely on having adequate shielding happen to be video cables. Like they were, ubiquitous, easy to get, and you knew that if it was a well-rated 75 ohm video cable that it's going to have shielding adequate for audio. That was another bit of like shorthand that got misinterpreted. It turns out the RCA connector is a bad connector for a 75 ohm cable. That's why you don't use it for professional video. You use a BNC connection or an F-type connection that actually retains that 75 ohm impedance. RCA plugs can't do it. They just have the wrong geometry for it, but it doesn't matter for audio. And then you ended up with this weird reverse situation where, well, we had those for audio, so we started using them for composite video because it was convenient. So he goes into all of that. There's great stuff in what they designed for their own audio cables, exactly why they did it, exactly why it's coax. So if you want the information that we rely upon, the technical information, this is it. And all of it completely checks out and makes sense. And that's why it's easy to just get a coax cable for your audio. Don't use twisted pair unless it's balanced.
Lastly, he says on a completely different topic, he's noticed that when he watched YouTube on his Apple TV, when he's done and tries to go back to the Apple TV's home menu, the YouTube app now displays a pop-up asking if he wants to leave the YouTube app first. And when he clicks yes, the screen just sits there, black, and then he has to mash the Apple remote's home button several times before the YouTube app finally releases its death grip. Have we noticed this issue? I don't have an Apple TV, so no, I have not. Is there an easy fix? Don't use the Apple TV. Or does he need to uninstall and reinstall, or possibly factory reset his entire Apple TV or something? I don't know, Rob.
So I haven't actually been using my Apple TV recently. So I haven't run into this, but that's not to say it isn't happening since the last time I did an update or something like that. I would definitely try just uninstalling the YouTube app and reinstalling it, because that really doesn't take that much time or effort. Entire factory reset of the Apple TV, that's a bit more of a pain because you have to re-log into things, but just uninstalling and reinstalling the YouTube app, I would definitely be willing to give that a try. There are a couple of things I saw mentioned just around on the internet. One of them is many people have run into issues if you have the match dynamic range setting set to on, because particularly if you have your default menu set to HDR, so like everything is going into HDR, but then you go to YouTube and it goes to SDR, and then it has trouble like getting back out of that and back into HDR. Apparently, many people are running into that issue, so perhaps turning the match dynamic range feature off would allow this to not happen so much. Just leave it HDR all the time or leave it SDR all the time, and don't do the match dynamic range part of things. The other one that was happening with this was the way that the default home button works on the Apple TVs these days is to take you back to the Apple TV app. Like that's where they want you to go by default. You can change that in the menu to go back to the original just show me my grid of all my apps things. And so many people are reporting that if you've left it in the default, which is trying to go back to the Apple TV app when you just press the home button once, that has glitches, not just with the YouTube app, that has glitches with multiple apps, because closing it down and reopening the Apple TV app throws something haywire in the background. So usually it's a double click to get back to your just grid of apps if you have it set by default. But if you change that in the menu to what does my home button do, you can say the single click just takes me back to my grid of apps, and that cleans up a lot of the interface issues. So could be worth a try.
Okay. Or just don't use that app. Don't use Apple TV. Jason, Lifehacker has provided plenty of useful tips for a wide variety of subjects. I don't know why we're advertising that here, but okay, Jason. Jason felt certain we would be able to rant about their take on the easiest way to soundproof a room. They say to start by locating the source of the noise. Even floors and ceilings can be the culprits, and they mention to look out for any of your own items that might be vibrating, although they don't offer any suggestions for what to do.
And we will just say museum putty. That's your friend.
Right. We've said that before. They say to soundproof your windows and doors by weather stripping them, potentially using storm inserts, or just putting some drapes or a fabric door panel over them. They do mention that soundproofing walls could involve cutting them open, but they only say you do that to put some insulation in there, and since they are trying not to involve any demolition, they suggest acoustic panels, peel and stick foam panels, or cotton drapes, pretty much as they're all as though they're all equal. For the ceiling, they all they can suggest are the same peel and stick foam panels, and for the floor, they suggest an underlayment and a rug. While he noted Lifehacker's article, they're hardly the only popular advice website making these sorts of suggestions. If you just Google easy ways to soundproof a room, all the top hits mention things like door seals, adding rugs, and cheap foam panels. So have at it. I'd like to hear a rant about this all too common advice. There's a lot of people looking that say, I just want to soundproof my room. Okay, and what can I do to soundproof
just
my room?
this wall just between this room and that room? That's the only one I care about.
I just answered the question. I kind of answered the question on Reddit the other day. Somebody was like, oh, I've got an opening that goes up, and it's a basement or something like that. It goes up and it's open. I can't put a door there. How can I soundproof that opening? I'm like, well,
can I put a curtain over it? That's what they always want to hear.
That's what they always want to do, is put a curtain. I'm like, you guys got to, I don't know where you're getting your curtains from. And the answer, of course, is just imagine, and we say this all the time, sound is like water. If you filled the room up with water, would the water get out? Well, the answer would be yes in almost every case, and therefore sound will get out. So what they're really talking about is just trying to lower the amount of sound that's transferred from one location to the other. And of course,
they're always talking about voices predominantly.
Yes.
That's what mostly people are like, I don't want to hear my neighbors talking. So
they're
talking about a narrow frequency range.
Yeah. They're not talking about like a subwoofer that's pounding away at reference level. Yeah. You trying to keep that from going through a wall, which is what we're talking about. So yes, we could rant about this, but just taking a room and filling it full of insulation and filling the walls full of insulation stuff will make that room seem quieter from the inside and from the outside to a certain extent. And if you do things like weather stripping, and you do things like plugging up windows or caulking windows and stuff like that.
I mean, I'm not mad at the seal all of your gaps, all of your openings. I'm not mad at that advice. That's perfectly
They never
reasonable.
mention HVAC, though, do they? There's like, seal this whole thing up, and now suddenly you get headaches in there after a couple hours because, because the oxygen levels are dropping.
I think, unfortunately for anybody who's trying to write this article, it's a losing battle because soundproofing, actual soundproofing, and we'll have a link to soundproofingcompany.com. Another one, again, they're like a retailer, but the articles they have there are beyond reproach. And if you want to learn what it actually takes to soundproof a room, all the information is there. It is not cheap and easy. These things are just mutually exclusive. Like, you can't actually soundproof a room in a cheap and easy way. Right. And people don't want to hear that. That's not good news, right? Now, this whole, can I put up a really thick drape and muffle the sound of a voice whatsoever? Yeah, a little bit. We all know that, right? You talk into a pillow, it's quieter than not talking into the pillow. Like, yeah, that makes sense. So I don't want to rant and say that what they're talking about is utter nonsense. It's just, it really isn't soundproofing, right? That's the real problem is the word. It's a misnomer.
Yes.
It's not soundproofing what they're talking about. It's slightly lowering, slightly deadening, slightly muffling some sounds. And the seal every gap that you reasonably can, that is a part of actual soundproofing. But the rest of it, we're just talking about slightly lowering things. Now, of course, they're falling into the common thing of conflating soundproofing with acoustics, sound absorption, room acoustics. Anytime they're talking about the foam panels, which aren't a great buy anyway, but like Acoustimac panels, which is a perfectly great recommendation, but not for soundproofing. It's good for the acoustics inside of your room. It's not going to stop transmission of sound out of your room or into your room, but that gets conflated all the time. So that I have a bit of a rant against, because that's not helping. It's not helping when what is supposed to be an advice article is conflating two different things that are commonly conflated, but it's not helping at all because it's just perpetuating that misinformation. So a bit of a rant against that. But the rest of it, I understand where they're coming from. It's just, the editor says, hey, this would be a great article. It's like, it's a losing battle. You can't write that article. Cheap, easy soundproofing doesn't exist.
Yeah, there is none. Yes. Eric. First up, Eric wanted to share his experience visiting Ascend Acoustics in San Clemente, California. I have a dog having a dream, so that's what that yipping sound is.
I didn't hear it.
She's chasing something. He was close by for work, so he gave them the call to see if a demo of their new CMT 340 SE2 speakers might be possible. Being very busy, Dave and Dino... Despite being very busy, Dave and Dino were kind and accommodating and spent some time with him answering some questions and showing him their demo room, where he was able to hear their newest speakers for himself. Eric has the original CMT 340 speakers, the non-SE version, and he immediately noticed the SE2's much better off-axis response, as well as their crisper sound, punchier mid-bass, and bigger soundstage. A quick knuckle test confirmed the much denser and more inert cabinet, and he was also able to see HDM 200 SE speakers and was happily surprised how compact they are. So he's feeling better than ever about making a future upgrade. Overall, it was a great experience, and he wanted to share how passionate, knowledgeable, and kind and caring everyone was. Are these pictures of the room? That's a lot of foam.
Yep. That is Ascend Acoustics demo room. I like the big old ATI amplifier that's in there. There's oodles of speaker wire just draped around the outside of the room with not much attention paid to the aesthetics of that, because this is one where they're swapping out speakers all the time. So I kind of like the utility of what they've done here. This is a nice utility room, but it's for experiencing the speakers, all the various lineup that they have in there. So I'm happy to hear that you had such a wonderful experience. It does feel nice to be like, hey, this is one of those speakers that I really, really like on a performance level, and then the people in the company behind it are genuinely nice, caring, passionate, small business people, and that feels good to support that.
I don't love seeing all the foam, but they do have a drop tile ceiling, which is, who knows what's up there.
That's
Could be
right.
acoustics up there, but whatever. It is what it is. It's better than some listening rooms I've seen from manufacturers that are nothing but glass.
At least there's some attention paid to acoustics in here.
Now to a question. Popular home theater YouTubers Joe and Tell and Technodad are selling a new spatial audio calibration toolkit. The digital version is available for $99, or you can pre-order a physical Blu-ray version, also $99, and you'll get the digital version too. So why not? I can think of 99 reasons why not.
Well, it's just, why would you get the digital only version? Right. It's like, then you only get the digital version. If you pre-order the physical version, you also get the digital version, and the price is the same. So, yeah.
It provides pink noise, sweeps, channel callouts, phase and imaging checks, and other test tones for a discrete 9.1.6 channel system. They also provide a PDF with instructions for adjusting everything either by ear or using a measurement microphone. Do we think it's worth it? What type of home theater user would benefit from getting it? Ones with lots of friends who will help foot the cost, because
there's that. Yeah.
So basically, okay. So we as somebody who's a reviewer and does stuff like this kind of regularly. First of all, I don't necessarily think that most people should buy things to help them, like calibration discs and calibration stuff like that. Microphone. Most people don't need microphones. I don't care what Reddit says.
Sure.
Most people don't know. Most people don't need colorimeters or any sort of video calibration tools or equipment. You just don't need it. You just don't need it, because you're going to use it once, maybe, and then you're going to put it away, and that's going to be it. And if you're like, well, I've got plenty of money, I don't care. $99 is nothing to me.
Sure.
I mean, fine, but certainly that $99 could go to something that you will use more than once. Certainly you could do something else with it. This is interesting. It's fine. I don't know what real good it does for you, since like the pink noise stuff. You can go and just listen to you can just listen to your receiver's calibration.
Well, I've got a little
stuff.
Yeah, I've got a little take on that.
I do like the sweeps and the callouts, but the object movement is all these things are kind of nice, but you could also just look up for free online movies that you already own that have scenes and find the scenes and do all that. So
I can appreciate. I can see exactly why they wanted to create this. I can understand it, which is, this is very, very similar to the old THX calibration setup, especially the phase tests between any given two speaker channels and the sweeps and all that. What we're lacking right now, like in Room EQ Wizard, you can send out individual test tones and individual sweeps to your 7.1 bed layer. But if you wanted to specifically send it out of any of your overhead speakers or from your wide speakers, if you have them, you can't easily do that inside of Room EQ Wizard. You can still track down the old 9.1.6 test tones that Dolby themselves had, play those back as essentially an MKV file in something, but it isn't a full sweep. So if you want to take a measurement with Room EQ Wizard, you can't really do that. It's just pink noise, which doesn't give you the same ability to measure the sweep and do your impulse checks and all those types of things. So this is for the person who wants to be able to measure in Room EQ Wizard predominantly. I can see some usefulness in it just for audio checks as well, without having a microphone and measurement, just to be able to play those sweeps out of an individual channel on command. It's somewhat useful for that, but I would say it's predominantly for the Room EQ Wizard crowd, who at the moment is lacking an easy way to send a sweep out of just one given channel that includes the front wides or 6 overheads. That is something that we're lacking right now, and this solves that problem. So I absolutely appreciate it. They did this on their own work and had these discs produced themselves. So the price, yes, if this was some massive company putting it out there, could they have got the price lower than $99? I'm sure some giant company could have, but these are essentially small businessmen doing this. So the price is maybe a little bit higher than it's just a disc, it's just a digital file. I think it's perfectly reasonable. I actually think it's like they're not making a ton of money on doing this. It's not super cheap to produce something like this. So I think it's very reasonable. I think it's useful for that specific crowd. I completely appreciate and understand why they created it. And if you're the person who's like, it's been bugging me that I can't play a sound out of my top middle speaker, and I want to be able to do that and measure it, $99, not so bad to be able to do that. So I'm perfectly fine with it. I don't think this is for casual people who aren't measuring or ever listening to a sweep in their life. They don't need this. And I don't think Joe and Tell or Techno Dad would tell you that that's who it's for either, to be perfectly honest.
Right. All right. Sorry. Joel. Speaking of Joe and Tell and Techno Dad, Joe posted about the loudness management settings on his Denon X6700H. He noticed that when using the Oromatic up mixer, God, I don't even understand why people use this crap now, on the Dolby Atmos content, compared to playing it back normally, it was sometimes much louder, which he initially thought was just some quirk of the upmixing. But then Techno Dad pointed out that specifically for Dolby True HD and Atmos signals, if loudness management is left on, which is the default, then not only is Dolby dialogue normalization being used, but for some reason dynamic compression also gets set to auto by default. For all other signals, including Dolby audio signals, besides True HD and Atmos, dynamic compression is set to off by default. So when Joe tried turning it off, suddenly the upmix versions and the natively decoded versions of Atmos soundtracks were much closer in volume. Nobody seems to know exactly what's going on here, and isn't super clear whether this dynamic compression setting within the loudness management section overrides Odyssey dynamic volume or the other way around, or if they cascade with one another. So are we able to explain? No.
Well, certainly not in a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. I mean, this is like a and you find this over the years. We have run into like weird settings that will change your defaults and stuff like that. And I guarantee you, like, if you were to mention this, if you were to bring this to the attention of one of the engineers that worked on this, they'd be like, well, that's not supposed to work that way.
Oh, well, in this case,
they would be surprised, or they would have an explanation. But most of the time they would be like, oh, well, we did that because of this, or I can understand why that happened. I guess I didn't think about that. So go ahead. Why does it happen, Rob?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not the authority on this whatsoever, but when it comes to loudness management, which is something that applies only to Dolby signals, particularly with the dialogue normalization, there's quite a bit written about dialogue normalization. The whole idea is that you are essentially putting your faith in the content creators, and then also whatever distributor you're listening to the content from, that they have correctly flagged the content. All right, dialogue normalization and the rest of loudness management is just some metadata that is part of the Dolby Digital or the Dolby Digital Plus or the Dolby True HD or the Dolby Atmos signal. It's a little piece of metadata. It's a little flag in there. The idea behind it is all on the production side. The idea is you can create one deliverable, and then whatever distributor you're sending it to, if they have certain criteria for this is the maximum loudness that we allow, or this is the average level that we want our signals to come out as, you can alter the original file just through the dialogue normalization setting instead of having to re-render the whole thing and send out a completely different file. You can just adjust this little piece of metadata, so on the production side, it's ease of use for the people making the content. But you are then putting your faith that the people who made it and then the distributor are doing everything correctly. This dynamic compression setting I'm not as familiar with, but it is a similar thing for the little bit of information I could find on it, which again, it's just a little flag in the metadata to essentially say, are you a service that has something like Apple's Sound Check, right? Where you're able to even out the volume level of everything in your whole library. It's a method to be able to do that for anything that is a Dolby signal. Do you want to apply dynamic compression to like the whole content library? You can just turn that flag on as a distributor if you want to. And we're just putting our trust in them doing that or not. So on something like a physical disc, the automatic setting is almost certainly not going to do anything. It's going to be the same as dynamic range off. But from a streaming service, who knows? They might have said, yeah, we want that flag on there. We want everything to come out at a pretty even volume range, no matter what the dynamics were supposed to be. So someone like Dan and Marantz, they're going to say, well, this is what Dolby says in their spec, right? They're saying put your trust in the metadata and the distributors to make that decision for you. So that's why the defaults are what they are. I don't really hold any blame on them. However, you're watching a given streaming service and everything's coming out 20 decibels too quiet, or the volume on the dialogue is too loud and the explosions is too quiet. It could be because they've said, yeah, we're turning that dynamic compression all the way as high as it goes, and the flag is active now. So if you want to take manual control of that, you have the ability to do so. You can go into the loudness management and either turn all of it off, which means dialogue normalization is also gone, or you can just turn off the dynamic range compression instead of allowing it to stay at auto. The setting is still there for you to manually override. So I get it. People don't like that you have to put that extra thought into the darn thing and potentially do that if you want to make sure you're retaining all dynamic range under every scenario, and you don't want to put your trust in the distributor, which I don't blame anybody. I don't trust all of them either. So I think that's a good piece of advice. It's not commonly talked about. If you want to make sure, it is as simple as just turning dynamic range compression off.
Does it remember?
As far as I know, I'm not 100% certain on that. I can't completely confirm that, but yeah. Turning loudness management off completely, that definitely sticks. I know for sure. That is remembered. So that is an option.
Okay. Dylan has been working on his basement for a couple of years now, and the construction is finally done. His last inspection was completed last week, so now it's finally time to complete the home theater area. It's a multi-use space, 460 square feet, in a slightly irregular shape with the theater area occupying the left half. It's about 3,600 cubic feet in total air volume. Mm-hmm. He used sound clips and hat channels to decouple the drywall from the walls and ceiling, double drywall with green glue throughout. He installed doors at both the top and bottom of the stairway, and putty pads cover the backs of every outlet and recessed in-ceiling light. For HVAC, he built duct mufflers, which seem to work nicely. There are windows at either end of the back wall, including an egress window in the rear left corner of the theater area. After getting advice from several sources, he was nervous. All of his soundproofing efforts might not have been worth the cost, but after connecting his Emotiva speakers and his single PB1000 Pro sub, which is not big enough for this space, and doing some tests, he's happy to report he is able to watch a movie at his desired volume level, and you can't hear anything up on the second floor where the bedrooms are, so that's a success. Also wasn't cheap, and it didn't involve putting panels on his walls.
It wasn't just sticky foam panels, no, but congratulations. I am very happy to hear that you're happy with your soundproofing. Like, he's not claiming that directly outside the one door, it's dead silence, but he's like, no, what he needed to accomplish, he accomplished. It wouldn't have happened if you'd just done a single layer of drywall with none of the other things in there. That wouldn't have been the case. So congratulations on that. That is by far the biggest step you can possibly take. So that is wonderful that is finally complete and successful.
So he has mounted a 75-inch Samsung QLED on an articulating mount that he can pull out 3.5 feet from the wall. He really likes being able to adjust his field of view as desired. His 4 bookshelf speakers have all been wall-mounted, and the center sits on an entertainment cabinet below his TV. He has 4 monoprice in-ceiling speakers for Atmos. The front left and right speakers end up being about as wide apart as they can go. But since his seating is all against the back wall, it creates a 45-degree spread, with the front left speaker basically jammed into the corner, and the front right speaker positioned to the outside of a somewhat unfortunately placed support column. He still has a clear line of sight to every speaker from the primary seats. His photo shows an armchair and futon, but that's just temporary, and the futon will be replaced with an L-shaped sectional that will take up most of the entire left wall. Okay, so, and his diagram is to scale, so if you're looking at this online, whatever, it's basically a rectangle, but it's got like a bump in the middle.
It's like a really stubby T. It's like a T with a really fat top and a really stubby bottom.
Yeah. So yeah. So
and pretty much the entire right half, a little more than half of the room to the right is not the theater area. The theater area is the left section of this basement.
Yes. All right. I'm scrolling. Oh yeah, and the support column. Oh, that's kind of nice.
You're doing what you can do. Yeah. Gotta live in the real world. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I bet you could pull the couch forward a little bit. So his questions are all about how you should acoustically treat this room. That's not the only question you should have, but that's the one we'll answer, along with some of the ones you didn't. With the right side being open, the left speaker is right against the left wall, and also keeping in mind his sectional will basically take up almost the entire bottom half of the left wall. Does he really need to be concerned about first reflection points? You do on the left one. His center speaker is low enough that its left wall reflection will be hitting the sectional couch, and then there's also that support column right in front of his front right speaker. So as far as sidewall first reflections go, what should he do? His wife is okay with acoustic panels as long as they are aesthetically pleasing, so he was thinking that he'd install a printed image, probably spanning across 3 panels on the left wall, but if it's centered above the sectional so that it looks nice, it won't really be at the first reflection point of any speaker. So would it even be worth it? Would it only be helping with overall RT 60 times, but not any specific reflections? Well, this room needs as much acoustic treatments as you can put in there because there's literally none at this point. That's not a drop tile ceiling.
It's not a drop tile ceiling. It's carpet. It's carpet. Yeah. So at least the highest frequencies, the upper part, the sibilance part of voices shouldn't be too bad in here. The sectional will be a slight bit of some of the mid-range RT 60 times. But yeah, this is a case where we're more concerned with, like, you're not going to get to 30% coverage. We're not going to try for that. No. You're probably not going to get to 15% coverage, although what is available to be done in the other half of the room, because it still counts. The sound doesn't care that you're only using half of this room as the theater area. What are you able to do in the other half of the room? Like, normally we say, okay, bass trapping first. What can we do bass trapping? Yes, I am absolutely guessing that I might be skipping ahead to a future question here, but I'm absolutely guessing that like super chunk bass traps in the vertical corners or soffit traps all around is just not the look that you're going to go for. That means we need to do as much as we can wherever we can. It's all going to help. You want to put as much on that left wall as you reasonably can, as thick and as much of that wall as you possibly can, because you have essentially no right wall in this setup as far as reflection goes. So that means if you have your image that's spanning across 3 panels and that's centered on that left wall, can you put like blank panels, maybe Acoustimax suede panels in a really nice color that complements this room or blends into the walls? Could those go on like either side of those 3 printed images and sort of frame it in? And it would look really nice. You can do that without having to jack the cost way up to get even more printed panels. Acoustimax suede panels can be a really good, or their executive fabric that comes in really nice fabrics and designer colors and all that type of stuff, can be a really good way to achieve that. So you want to cover basically as much of that left wall as you possibly can. it isn't even so much that I'm worried terribly about the first reflection from your front left speaker. It's just we want that left wall to be about as deadened as it can reasonably be. The thicker the better. I'm also going to suggest like the front wall, which normally we don't focus a ton on the front wall, but there's no reason that front wall can't be like the same color as your wall, but now a bunch of panels as thick as they can possibly be, because wherever we can sneak bass trapping into this room, we want to do so. So if you can get 4.5 inch thick panels, 4-inch panels with an air gap, but hide it on that front wall and have it blend into the exact same color, which you can do with your choice of fabric, then that's something I would recommend. We're going to talk specifically about the back wall in his next question.
Okay. Let me scroll down because I was looking at the picture. First of all, I agree with Rob. It just everywhere. Okay, everywhere. I would consider looking at like GIC and some of these other places where they make printed panels where you can get one big image across multiple panels.
Yep, that's what he wants to do. Yep.
And then just, don't limit yourself to 3 panels. Like however many panels you can shove into that, even if they are like tucked behind the couch somewhat as well. Like just, in having them vertically.
It does get more expensive though. So that's why I was thinking that, you can almost like frame it in with other panels, and that can look nice too. And like I say, whatever's going on the right side of the room, again, we're talking about the bass trapping side of things. So whatever you can do on the right side of the room is helpful too.
The other thing you consider too is geometric shapes and patterns that way. So, if you think about like these designers who like tape off, parts of the wall and then paint in like a grid pattern that's in a diamond, like a diamond grid pattern thing. Instead of doing that, you could just do that left wall with like 4-inch thick squares that were 2x2, and then hang them so that they kind of give you that geometric shape that you're looking for.
Or maybe that's the front wall to add some interest to the front wall behind the TV.
Behind the TV.
Too. Yeah.
So, just be creative here, because the more acoustic panels you can put in here, and on the other side of that room too, that there's going to be reflections over there. Yes, they have to travel farther, so they're going to lose some energy, but they'll lose a lot more energy if they have to go through a panel before they come back. Yeah. For the back wall, he intends to make geometric shapes that can act as decoration as well as acoustic treatment. So I'm brilliant, apparently. He'll be able to mount those behind the armchair and the right-hand side of the sectional on the back wall, but the whole rear left corner is taken up by an egress window. He will put up some curtains to cover that window. Is there any type of curtain that could help with acoustics? No.
Well, I mean, not bass, but I mean, what we mentioned in the previous question where, if in the vocal range, I mean, literally just as thick and heavy of drapes as you can. We all know that if you bunch up a thick, heavy drape and then talk into it, it does have an impact on those frequencies. So, corduroy drapes, really heavy plush velvet drapes, anything like that. But, more than you would think you would need just to cover that window. Like you want it all bunched up so that it's essentially creating a thick pseudo panel. Don't expect it to do anything for your bass. But as far as like mitigating some of the dialogue reflection off of that back wall, since unfortunately your seats are pressed right against the back wall, having a big, thick, heavy drape that's all pleated up and bunched together, there is some help in the vocal range for that. So that's what you want to do.
Let's discuss not having that couch exactly on the back wall too. Like maybe pull it forward just however far it takes to tuck a panel in behind it so that you get it right behind your head. Let's consider that. It's only a couple inches. You're not going to really notice it. And then you could have your geometric shape thing on the back wall going all the way across. Wouldn't that be nice? And it'll be nice all the way across. Lastly, he says, what else? As mentioned, any acoustic treatments have to look nice. So super chunks and large soffit traps aren't really an option. Anything else we would suggest to get the acoustics in here as good as reasonably possible? Like, be creative, my dude. Also, where's your second sub? Let's talk about that, okay? Because you've got your first sub to the left of your right speaker, right? Now, measure into the room where that sub is, and then go on your back wall and measure into the room from the right wall instead of the left wall, how far that is, and then put a subwoofer right there. Okay, that's
seems like it could be done.
I mean, there's a big long wall there. There's a couch that's going to be sitting there that you can run wire behind, and then along the maybe tuck it.
And that is the only way to address the low bass frequencies that
Yeah.
no passive treatments, unless they were unreasonably thick, would be able to touch. So that
Right.
that is, in a sense, acoustic treatment as well, is adding
Yes.
that second subwoofer to address the deepest bass that can't be treated any other way. But yeah, I just wanted to mention, in the overall sense, I think he was perhaps more concerned with specific first reflections than
than he needs to be,
should be
for
the
sure.
priority, right? Yeah, the priority is let's get the RT 60 times, in particular the crossover region and the bass. Let's focus on doing that because we're less concerned about the specific first reflections. A lot of that is going to be mitigated by covering that entire left wall and the back wall as much as you possibly can, and it sort of takes care of itself.
And I think everybody, but we as well have been guilty of emphasizing first reflection points simply because they're a known quantity. Like, we know that there's going to be a bounce there.
Once you've done the bass, then that's the next thing.
Right.
But if you're in a situation where fully bass trapping this room isn't really viable, then we're just, let's just do what we can as much as we can. And then, the first reflections come well after that and are almost going to be taken care of.
But I feel like people get wrapped up into these first reflection points. Like, if you can't treat that, then there's no point doing anything. Okay. So we say first reflection points because it is, we know that there's a bounce there that you can catch and it will make a difference. But it's not like that is the most important thing. But it does feel like, because it's always mentioned first, that is the most important one. It really isn't. The most important one is bass trapping by far. You know, it is any sort of bass trapping you can do is the most important. And I know you said super chunks and columns or whatever, or soffit stuff is out, but it really isn't. You're wrong, because you have a stupid support column like just sticking out in the middle of your room. So you cannot tell me that a super chunk somehow is too much of an eyesore when you've got this column here. You're like, well, this column needs to be here or the roof falls. Well, that super chunk needs to be there or your bass sucks. So, make a decision about, how impossible these things are, because you can take those super chunk traps, and yes, we always talk about floor to ceiling. Well, it doesn't have to be floor to ceiling. It can be, floor to wall. It could be ceiling to, into soffit traps. It can be all kinds of things. And you've got, I know you've already mounted them to the wall. All right. I know you already have. All right. That's a done thing.
Right.
But what you could have done, which you did not do, what you could have done is said, I'm going to have this crazy column right here. So rather than try to, put the wall back and put the speaker on the wall, why not mount the speaker to the column and then,
or have it on a stand beside it?
Yeah.
Which could have been, then you could have the same thing with the front left speaker on the other side.
Right. And then you could have taken this column that's here and just basically created a frame that goes straight back to the wall so that it kind of comes in a little bit, and then done the same thing on the opposite side. And now you've got two freestanding floor to the ceiling bass traps just sitting there. You could have done that. You didn't do that, which is fine, but that's what you could have done. And this might have visually looked better than what you currently have, which is a speaker that's kind of firing into this pole here, and the pole being, or this column being, kind of in the middle of the room. You could have visually said, okay, this column has to be here. How can we integrate this?
Like, in a way, you're creating a partial false wall.
Exactly.
The existing geometry.
You could have actually created a false wall using this column. You could have done that and then put everything behind there and, you bumped it out and then filled the entire thing with insulation and mounted the TV to it, and all the wires behind there, and that furniture could still be behind there. You could have done a lot of stuff. So, think outside the box. Like, this is us freeballing here, just looking at this room going, oh, this is some of the things you could have done, or here's some things you can do. Let's not get tied into a super chunk, which only can be built in this one way, is impossible when it really isn't. It really isn't impossible to do these things. You just have decided that the way that you've seen it done is not the way that you want to do it. Well, let's find another way to do it. And we could definitely do those things. Myles, Myles has an HD Home Run Quattro ATSC 3.0 tuner, network tuner. It works really well to pull in over-the-air broadcasts, both ATSC 1 and 3, 1.0 and 3.0. And since it's on his network, he can easily use the app for on any of his smart TVs to watch broadcasts in any room. He's got 3 Roku TVs and a Vizio as well. Only one of his Roku TVs supports Atmos. And when he is watching ATSC 3.0 broadcasts, that is the only TV that produces any sound. His other TVs can show an image, but there's no sound. He's under the impression that this is due to ATSC's 3.0 broadcast using the new Dolby AC4 codec. He's been able to confirm that the newest Roku soundbars are able to decode AC4 signals, but he would still be using the apps on the smart TVs to access his network tuner. Those TVs just have regular HDMI ARC or optical audio out. So would they be able to send the AC4 audio along to a Roku soundbar? Nobody from any of his TV brands or from Roku has been able to provide an answer. If they cannot, does he need to replace all of his TVs? I don't think it can send. I mean, that's not how ARC works. I thought ARC maxed out at Dolby Digital compressed or whatever.
It's the same as your optical connection as far as the original version of HDMI ARC. So yeah, I think it's not either or. I think the solution here is buy little separate Roku streaming devices. I'm sure one reason he's doing this is that he just wanted the simplicity of, okay, my TV has everything built into it and I do everything there and I don't have to deal with a separate remote and another device and potentially switching inputs or any of that. But the much more cost-effective solution for your scenario here is you just buy, if Roku is the interface that you like best, there's no reason that you can't get nice, inexpensive Roku devices. That's their bread and butter, is inexpensive streaming sticks and little streaming boxes. And that would allow you to make all of this work, because their newest Roku devices, you might need to get the 4K one. But I mean, the 4K Roku stick is not crazy expensive or anything, even though you're only connecting it to a 1080p TV in some cases. That might just be what you need. That one, I'm not certain on all the specs there, so it'd be just a double checking, making sure that it's going to work with Atmos and AC4. So yeah, that to me is absolutely the solution in this scenario. I don't think it makes financial sense to say replace all the TVs. I think it makes much more sense to plug some 4K Roku sticks into them, and now you're able to enjoy everything you want. You don't have the easy solution of just because the soundbar is able to do the audio decoding of doing things that way, because it isn't like the device that's receiving the stream, right? The device that's receiving the stream is the TV. The TV already can't handle the audio, and HDMI ARC, regular ARC, not eARC, regular ARC isn't going to be able to send it out anyway. So unfortunately, the soundbar isn't going to be the solution on the audio side. You really need to replace the source device, but thankfully, that's pretty inexpensive. So just because we're coming up to the end, I put Lance's all the way down to the bottom because it's not really a time sensitive, but he was actually the first question that came in this week. So I think Martin's and Lance's, I think we could do, because Martin's
isn't too long. I was supposed to think about this, right?
Yeah, well, Martin's is a little bit of a technical question I'd like to answer for him, but it's not super long. And then Lance's is the last one. So yeah, I'll just say right now for Raf and Jay, you are on the list and you'll be up next week.
All right. Martin in Ireland. Martin installed a projector and AV receiver at his church, just a 1080p projector and a Denon X2700H. They use 3 HDMI sources, a Blu-ray player, a computer connected via a short HDMI cable at the back of the room, and then they also have a 100-foot long fiber optic HDMI cable that goes to the front of the room so that a laptop or iPad can be easily plugged in. Everything was working fine for several months, but now the long HDMI cable that goes to the front has stopped working with anything other than the iPad. Martin assumes that since they're frequently hot plugging, something probably got damaged or fried, but it's so strange that the iPad still works, but nothing else. No laptop or even the Blu-ray player will work, but the iPad does. It was an inexpensive fiber optic HDMI cable from Amazon, so you just get another, knowing full well the replacement will probably burn out in another few months. Would it be worth getting a recommendation for a more expensive fiber optic HDMI cable that would hopefully last longer, or should they just switch to an Ethernet adapter for this long connection? 100 feet is really quite long. I'd not be surprised if just the hot swapping has damaged something in the connector side of it, but I imagine the iPad is not putting out quite the resolution or trying to put out the resolution.
Although that shouldn't really matter in a fiber optic case where it's all being translated anyway. It's very puzzling as to why that one device continues to work when nothing else does. If you're like, if it stopped working, but like, oh, that's quite easy. Something got kinked in the optical cable, or the connector got damaged. That would be pretty easy. So my only concern is, okay, because I think actually switching to the Ethernet adapter isn't a bad idea. Like, you're talking 1080p here, so we're not worried about any 4K resolution or high frame rates or anything like that. You can quite easily find not too expensive anymore Ethernet adapters that only need to go up to basic high speed 1080p. So the only question would be, is there any possibility through all the hot swapping that you'd end up burning out one of the little converters, right? The one at the front of the room where you're doing the hot swapping. Could you burn out one of the little converters that's converting the HDMI signal to Ethernet? That isn't something I've really heard much about. It's possible that you'd end up replacing, shorter HDMI cables at the front of the room that are just going to the converter, but those can be very inexpensive and not something I worried about. I think that's actually a pretty reasonable thing to do in this instance, is use one of the Ethernet adapters, because even though the fiber optic cables, again, you don't need ultra high speed or anything. So you could keep replacing 100-foot fiber optic HDMI cables, but, that does add up over some amount of time. I actually do think the Ethernet adapter is the right way to go in this instance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I have to scroll down. Okay, Lance, what were Tom and Rob's motivations for getting into audio, video, and home theater? Was it more the technical side of things, the gear itself, professional interest, just a love of movies or TV, or maybe music or video games, perhaps? What was the spark? I have told the story many times, so I'm not going to tell it again now, that I experienced home theater for the first time when I was in college, and I thought it was awesome, and I wanted to have a home theater of my own. And that got me posting on forums until, and I have a natural writing ability. I've been writing for a long time before this, before I started writing for AV, and then got a job writing AV stuff, and then the rest is history. So just having the experience of home theater and wanting one for myself and doing research like you guys are doing and gals are doing, that got me into this profession.
So, I mean, I'll be really honest and a little bit raw here. I mean, honestly, the spark, the thing that started me into home theater whatsoever, was right at the tail end of high school for me, and it was heartbreak. It was my first really bad, horrible, heart-wrenching breakup, and I was playing video games and that, and it was kind of like I need something to occupy my mind, and that was DVD was relatively new. The Matrix was coming out and making all sorts of waves, and so that just kind of caught my attention, and I was able to spend $400 on an RCA home theater in a box and have surround sound at home for the first time, and that was actually the spark. But it all kind of stemmed from some heartbreak and depression, which honestly I think a lot of other home theater fans can kind of commiserate on maybe that kind of what was the spark of the whole thing. But then when I started really getting into it, I mean, it sounds kind of funny, but it was the Nintendo GameCube. That's the thing that actually got me more into okay, I need to understand the technical side of things, because that was the first device with Dolby Pro Logic 2 that could, take a 2-channel analog signal, but matrix out a 5.1 signal and give you semi-discrete surround and center channels from just a 2-channel stereo analog mix. And it was the Nintendo GameCube, and then getting my first, Kenwood receiver that was the first affordable receiver that could do Dolby Pro Logic 2, and that is what just got me starting into internet forums and going down that whole path and finding information that way, and then being like, yeah, there's so much here to learn, and it just kept growing and it just kept going, and that's what started it all off.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm trying to write stuff down. What was our all-time top 5 or 10 favorite movies? And as a side note, how did either of us enjoy Thor: Love and Thunder? It was one of the very few movies I ever walked out of. We talked about it on this podcast. I don't know why anybody would walk out of that movie. I've only walked out of a couple, maybe 2 movies. I've turned some off, which I don't think is quite the same as paying for a movie and then, I don't think it's quite the same as paying for a movie and then walking out of. I think My Blue Heaven or something like that was a movie with, it was like, I don't remember. It was like a mob guy got somehow, I think it was in witness protection or something. I don't know. That movie was so bad I walked out of. I thought that movie was just fine. I think I've commented that the colors were a little bright for me. I don't see why anybody would have walked out of it, but
I mean, I actually think Tom enjoyed Thor: Love and Thunder a little bit more than I did, but the colors were one of the things I did enjoy. It was a very hammy, silly movie, so yeah, if that just completely rubs you the wrong way, I get it. So, but I'm willing, like, it's not as though the movie was trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes about what type of tone it had. It started that way, and it stayed that way. Well, I guess it didn't start that way. The very first scenes were a little bit more serious, and then it went, full ham and stayed that way. So, but yeah, I don't think it, like, misrepresented itself or anything like that. So, anyway. Enough about that. On to our top 5 or 10 favorite movies. And I can't include everything that was really, I consider some of my favorite movies, but I got at this first before Tom. He's working away on this in the background. So I'll go ahead and start. I think, honestly, I still think my favorite movie is Spider-Man. The Sam Raimi 2002 Spider-Man. It's a movie that I just say there is not a single unimportant or uninteresting scene. Every single scene, every single camera change is like either important or entertaining. And I think that's kind of remarkable on a filmmaking scale, just to be able to have every single shot be an interesting shot. So I think Spider-Man remains way up there. My next one, Ghost in the Shell, the 1995 animated version of Ghost in the Shell. I can't say enough good things about that movie. If you want an actual, like, cerebral movie that challenges some of your thinking and unsettles you, it is an unsettling movie. And I very much appreciate that. I can't think of many movies that are more unsettling than Ghost in the Shell. Well worth it if you haven't really gotten into it. Maybe just because it's anime, not everybody has watched that one, but I would highly encourage you to do so.
I definitely didn't love that movie as much as you did. Or the first Spider. I like the first Spider-Man. I don't love it as much as you clearly do.
Well, there we go. I mean, it's great. We have very different tastes. Moulin Rouge, which I know Tom does like very much.
I do love that movie.
That movie's way, way up. I mean, it's just the crying at the end. It actually works. It actually gets me. Not many, like, sobbing scenes actually move me, and I'm like, nope, that one got me. I was on board with that. I was almost ready to walk out of that movie all the way up through, like, the Toulouse-Lautrec introduction, because, man, it was a little too much. It was a little
much. I totally agree. That movie, you have to, like, power through, like, the first 10 minutes of it to get to it's, like, so overstimulating that you're like, okay, this is too much. I mean, totally agree with that.
It's annoying, and it's loud, and it's overly fast cuts, and it's ridiculous. And I was like, am I going to withstand another hour and a half of this? But then the very next scene calms down. And I was like, oh, it's good. I'm glad you did, because throughout the rest of the movie, I absolutely love that. So okay, let's see. Number 4 for me, Star Wars, and Star Wars: A New Hope, Episode 4. Do I really need to say much more? It's no. Star Wars. We're a home theater podcast. So Jurassic Park, another one. Like, do I really need to say that much? It's one of my favorite movies. Then I did want to mention Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the 4th movie, which I don't think is very...
said those words.
I don't think is very many people's favorites. I see all sorts of people, like, just criticizing that one in particular. It's the only one out of all 8 Harry Potter movies. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire is the only one where I felt like these are kids at a British boarding school. And I think it's because Mike Newell, the director, was someone who went to a British boarding school. And he's like, this is the way kids were when I went to school. And it's the only one that made me feel like, yeah, these are actual, like, teenagers, tweens, like, coming of age right at there. And I loved The Goblet of Fire. That's my favorite Harry Potter movie by far out of the whole thing. And I think it's just a fantastic movie. Next up for me, The Shining just remains absolutely one of my favorite movies of all time. I mean, not exactly controversial pick, but at least it's not going to be all action movies for me or something like that.
It's a fine movie. It's a little slow for me, honestly, but it's fine.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Castaway. Why would Castaway be on my list of top 10 movies? Castaway is a very important movie to me. It is the movie that changed my mindset about how to watch movies, and not on the first watch, on the second watch. It did that for me, and it's because I think a lot of people do this, especially a movie like Castaway, the scenario, man being, lost a airplane crash and he's on an isolated island all by himself. I don't think it's unusual to think, well, what would I do in this scenario? And that's how I watched that movie the first time through. It was like, what would I do? Is what he's doing reasonable? Do I think all of his choices make sense? And I missed the point of the movie. I missed what the movie was actually about, because that movie was not about a man by himself on an island. That is the in-your-face plot of the thing. But that is not the actual point or what the movie is about. And it wasn't until I watched it the second time and just watched the movie instead of being in my own head, thinking about things like what I would do in this scenario. When I just watched the movie, I was like, oh, I didn't get it the first time. And so it changed my mindset to not come into movies going, what am I expecting? What do I think this should be? What would I do in this area? None of that. It changed my mindset to, let's just watch the movie and let it tell me its story so that I get what they were trying to do. So a very important movie to me. And then the last two, The Dark Knight. I mean, another one, do I need to really say more? And The Talented Mr. Ripley, which I wanted to have on there because I don't think it's going to be on everybody's top 10 list. And for me, this is it's all about the acting, the performance, but also the wonderful imagery. I don't know there's that many movies that are a better example of just the sheer imagery being paralleled with what is happening in the scene and what is happening in the characters' minds. To me, it's just it's a movie that can only be a movie. That's what I love about it. You can't The Talented Mr. Ripley is a book, I believe. It's based on it. But the movie version of it is a great example of how to adapt one medium into another and fully take advantage of this new medium to tell the story in a way that is unique to that medium and brings on the feeling of the original source material, but in a way, like people always say, this is a book that can't be adapted or whatever. Perfect example of how you change it and then take full advantage of the new medium. And I think The Talented Mr. Ripley does that wonderfully. That's my list.
All right. I made my list just now based on movies I could think of that I have seen a whole bunch. Okay. So some of those, The Dark Knight would be on there. I've seen it a bunch. I've probably seen the first Batman with Michael Keaton more than that, but I really don't like that movie nearly as much.
Oodles of honorable mentions I could put on mine. So.
Yeah. So I'll go through some of these movies, and again, most of these are not based on sound. These are just video. It's just these are movies I've seen a lot of that I've really enjoyed. Dangerous Liaisons would be near the top of the list of movies. The number of movies I've seen multiple times. I've watched that movie a lot. It's with Glenn Close and John Malkovich. Phenomenal movie. It's a period piece. You may hate it and walk out of it, but you're wrong. It's a great movie. And there's just nothing not to like in there except for Keanu Reeves, who absolutely takes you out of that movie. Like every time he walks in the room, you're like, get the surfer guy out of this period piece. He is not nailing it.
That happens in Bram Stoker's Dracula too.
Oh, he's the same. Yes, exactly. Believe me, he's way younger and way worse in Dangerous Liaisons. I mean, it's worth watching the movie just to see him walk on and try not to go, oh. Matrix is in there because I've seen that movie just oodles and oodles of time. You could probably put almost any Pixar movie. I think I've seen The Little Mermaid more than I've seen any other Pixar movie. But
I feel bad that I didn't have a Disney movie in there. There should have been one for me, but
there's lots. And I'm a lot of the Marvel movies, the first Iron Man, blah, blah, blah. But The Descent, I've talked about a lot on this podcast. Yeah. I love that movie. Yeah, that's a great movie, great pacing, great everything. Do not watch the theatrical version of it because the end sucks. Watch the extended or the unrated or the directors or whatever they call it. That one's
or the UK version, if nothing else, because that's the same.
Big Trouble in Little China is the first movie I ever I actually walked to the theater to see it a second time from my house. That's that when I was that young. I had to walk down there, and it was the first movie I ever watched twice by my own money by doing it. The Crow, I've seen in the theater more times than anything else. I talked
Wouldn't be
about that
Tom's
before.
list without The Crow. That makes sense.
John Wick, of course. Dread, I loved, and they're making a sequel, so I'm excited about that. Wrath of Khan.
And you are talking about the Carl Urban one,
I
right?
am.
The Dread Carl Urban, not the Sylvester Stallone.
Not the Sylvester Stallone one. Yes, it was a travesty. The Wrath of Khan. Love. You know, I mean, as of the Star Wars movies, Star Trek movies, that's
Star Trek.
very hard to top. I do think it's better than the Voyage Home or whatever the one was with the whales. But that's I think still my favorite. Another horror movie, Oculus, which you can stream on and off. I think of scary movies go, it's very hard to find one that's better than that. And of course, lastly, I'll mention I have other things on there that Rob also said, like Moulin Rouge, but The Princess Bride. I mean, if you haven't seen that movie, then what rock have you been living under? So, another phenomenal movie that is just, and I've read the book on that one too. There is literally, it's almost word for word, like almost word cut for cut. There's one chapter, and all these chapters are very short because they're the length of the scenes that you see in the movie. There's one chapter that's missing, maybe two, and they're like backstory for Andre the Giant's character and stuff, and they didn't need it. So that's it. We already talked about who's coming up next. So we want to
Raph and Jay next week.
Thank our listeners of the week. Thank our 135 patrons over at patreon.com, including Martin. So thank you to all of our patrons.
Yeah, that's patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks for this financial support from our 135 patrons. And Martin, thank you for being one of them.
We want to thank Dan for sending me a code for Alita, as well as Michael and Dylan for sending me photos to use with permission on avgadgets.com.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Michael and Dylan.
Lastly, we got some notes of gratitude, and we want to thank them from Lance, Dan, Peter, Jay, Michael, and Martin. Thank you for thanking us.
Indeed. I'll say the names one more time. Lance, Dan, Peter, Jay, Michael, and Martin, thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude sent to us for keeping the podcast going, even when there are snowstorms outside and I have to travel. It's just, we're willing to do it. We do it for the love. So thank you all so much, and thank you for everybody for continuing to listen and sending in your questions.
To get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.